Greetings, everyone. Today we will discuss the principles of construction. Before anything else, just a disclaimer, the individual behind this YouTube channel is a law student. This is not an attempt to present himself as an expert in the field, but merely an effort to share his knowledge of statutory construction based on what he learns and understands in his study of law. This lecture is merely a supplement to your study of this subject. It does not seek to replace your reading materials or contradict what your professors have discussed with you. So let's begin. The general principles of construction should always be considered regardless of whether intrinsic or extrinsic aids of construction are found to be applicable. What we will discuss now are the general principles of construction. Take note, at this point, we are delving into the general principles of construction, meaning there is already an ambiguity. We mentioned in our previous discussion that before the courts can construe, there should be ambiguity. So if there's already an ambiguity or the law is subject to two or more interpretations, what will the courts do? We will answer that question in this discussion. For the first principle, we have law construed as a whole. A law must be construed as a whole and the words, phrases, and clauses of a statute should not be studied in isolation but rather analyzed in light of its other cognate provisions in order to understand the meaning attached to them by the legislature. So what do you think is the reason why we should construe or the courts should construe the statute as a whole? Common sense would already tell us that a statute was passed by the Congress as a whole. It was never passed in parts or in sections, correct? So when we read a law in the official gazette, we do not also see any partly published laws because laws are made and passed by Congress as a whole. That being said, we should construe the law as a whole. It is a dangerous practice, according to the Supreme Court, to base a construction upon only a part of a section since one portion may be qualified by the other portion. Where a requirement is made in explicit and ambiguous terms, no discretion is left to the judiciary. It must see to it that its mandate is obeyed. See, that would be dangerous according to the Supreme Court. Because if you read a particular provision from a law in isolation, it would really mean different. The entire law would mean different. That's why our professors in law school would always emphasize that when you read your codal, you should not skip any provision, is it not? Because if we will read a provision in isolation, we would not fully understand what the law is all about. So that's also a reason why we should construe the law as a whole. So here's an interesting case. So in this case, Caudal versus Court of Appeals, the petitioner is a lessee, the respondent is the lessor. The respondent filed an ejectment case against the petitioner on the ground of legitimate need of the owner or lessor to repossess his property for his own use or for the use of any immediate member of his family as a residential unit. So that's under Section 5, Paragraph C of BP 877. Take note, however, the respondent will use a portion of the leased unit as servants' quarters. Take note of that. So under Section 5, Paragraph C of BP 877, it states one of the grounds for ejectment of a lessee. Take note of the bolded and underlined phrases. Okay. So the petitioner said, okay, that's a valid ground for ejectment, but wait, you are not exclusively using it for your residence and the residence of your immediate family members. Kasi nga, the respondent is also using it for servants' quarters. So who is correct between them? So the issue is, can the respondent eject the petitioner? So according to the Supreme Court, the respondent is correct. Okay. So in this case, what did the Supreme Court do? We mentioned earlier that the relevant law in question is the ground for ejectment. Is it not? So that was Section 5, Paragraph C. The Supreme Court referred to, in this case, in Section 2, Paragraph B of the law. So in doing so, the Supreme Court determined. The Supreme Court found out what is really the meaning of residential unit. So going back, the Supreme Court said that if the respondent and his family members actually live therein and use it principally for dwelling, that would be considered within the purview of residential unit. Thus, going back to Section 5, Paragraph C, it is a valid ground for ejectment. So at this point, it is now clear to us if the Supreme Court did not construe the statute as a whole in this case, then the petitioner would seem correct in his contention. However, when the courts construed it as a whole, it revealed that the interpretation of the petitioner of the law is quite strict, which is contrary to the intent of the legislature. Another case, Sahonas versus Court of Appeals. So in this case, the law in question is Section 70 of Land Registration Decree. So it states there that the adverse claim shall, okay, take note of the word shall, be effective for a period of 30 days. We know that when a statute uses the word shall, it is mandatory, meaning it is required. So, since the statute uses the word shall, would that mean that the notice of adverse claim will automatically lose its force after a period of 30 days? So that is actually the issue in this case. So what did the Supreme Court say? So the Supreme Court said no. According to the Supreme Court, in construing the law aforesaid, care should be taken that every part thereof be given effect and a construction that would render a provision inoperative should be avoided, and inconsistent provision should be reconciled whenever possible as parts of a harmonious whole. Because the Supreme Court, in this case, construed Section 70 of the Property Registration Decree as a whole. When they did that, they found out this phrase. Okay? They found out this phrase. It states that after the lapse of the said period, the annotation of adverse claim may be cancelled upon filing of a verified petition, therefore, by a party in interest. So, see, if the intention of the law really is to have the adverse claim lose its effect immediately after 30 days, then it would not have been necessary to include this phrase in the same section of the law. Again, the Supreme Court, if they did not construe the statute as a whole in this case, the decision of this case would be different. The intent of the law would be defeated. That's why it is really imperative to construe the statute as a whole. So, for the next principle, presumption of justice. That's under Article 10 of the New Civil Code. It states there, in case of doubt in the interpretation or application of laws, it is presumed that the lawmaking body intended right and justice to prevail. I guess we are all familiar with the maxim dura lex sed lex. The law may be harsh, but it is the law. But that is when the law is clear. That is when the law has no room for construction. So automatically, the judge will apply the law if the law is clear. However, when there is doubt in the interpretation or application, the judge will presume that the lawmaking body intended right and justice to prevail. So why is this important? Because when courts construe the law, they should do it in a way that the rights of persons will be protected, that justice will prevail. That's according to Article 10 of the New Civil Code. So let's have an interesting case. This is the case of Salvacion versus Central Bank. So in this case, the law in question is Section 8 of RA 6426. According to this law, foreign currency deposits shall be exempt from attachment. Take note, exempt from attachment, garnishment, or any other order or process of any court, legislative body, government agency, or any administrative body whatsoever. So this case is very sad. But I love how the Supreme Court sitting en banc decided in favor of the victim. So I invite your attention to the case of Salvacion versus Central Bank. You should read the full text of this case. In this case, the tourist raped a 12-year-old child. So that's very unfortunate. Now, the child was able to obtain a favorable judgment in a civil case. So the amount of the award was 1 million pesos. They were able to secure a writ of attachment against the dollar bank account of the tourist. So the Philippine and Central Bank, however, refused to honor the writ, saying that under Section 8 of RA 6426, foreign deposit shall be exempt. Like we read earlier, it shall be exempt. So who is correct? How did the Supreme Court decide? So that's the issue, whether or not the dollar bank deposit in a Philippine bank of a foreign tourist can be attached to satisfy the moral damages awarded in favor of the latter's 12-year-old rape victim. So, can that be done? The Supreme Court said, in fine, the application of the law depends on the extent of justice. So, you can just read this portion of the decision, but this is the wonderful part of the decision, actually. When the Supreme Court did not did what the Supreme Court did in this case was that they applied Article 10 of the new Civil Code when they interpreted RA 6426. They said that the application of the law depends on the extent of justice because unfortunately, this law failed to contemplate a situation like the case before us, that's according to them, where it would result in justice if we let the accused be exempted from liability. So the Supreme Court applied Article 10 of the new Civil Code. So as a result, right and justice was duly served. So you read the full text of this decision. So you can better appreciate Article 10 of the new Civil Code. So for the next principle, construction consistent with the Constitution. The statute should be construed in harmony with and not in violation of the fundamental law. This is very self-explanatory. In the first place, why would you ask the court to construe a law? What is your basis for saying that a particular law is invalid? Because it contravenes the Constitution. The Constitution, after all, is the fundamental law of the land. In other words, no law or contract should violate the Constitution. So whenever the courts construe a particular law, they will always go back to the fundamental law of the land, that is the Constitution. Where a statute is reasonably susceptible to two constructions, one constitutional and the other unconstitutional, that construction in favor of its constitutionality shall be adopted. So, this, however, contemplates a situation where the interpretation is reasonably and evenly balanced. Take note of that. It should be reasonably and evenly balanced. It does not contemplate a situation where the statute is obviously unconstitutional, yet the court will uphold its constitutionality. No, the court cannot do that. While judges are presumed to perform or they presume the law to be constitutional, they are not allowed to make biased interpretation. So the judge should perform according to its mandate. Okay? So they cannot uphold the constitutionality of a law even if it is apparent that that law is unconstitutional. Every intendment of the law should lean towards its validity. The court should favor that construction which gives it the greater chance of surviving the test of constitutionality. So, you should take note, however, that what is the requirement for this principle? It should be fairly susceptible to two interpretations. So, it's like an equipoise rule. If you have taken up your criminal procedure already, you learned that uh, the equipoise rule applies when the evidence in favor of the accused and the evidence in favor of the prosecution is evenly balanced, correct? So if it is evenly balanced, the court will warrant the acquittal of the accused. Ganun din dito. If evenly balanced ang interpretation, one in favor of the constitutionality, one in favor of the unconstitutionality, then the court will declare that law to be constitutional. But again, I should emphasize this. It should be evenly balanced. Okay? So, Construction to render the provision effective. Ut res mahes valiat quam pariat. The thing should rather have effect than destroyed. In construing a statute, courts should start with the assumption that the legislature did not do a vain thing in the enactment of the statute. It is presumed that the law enacted by the legislature is complete by itself, that the legislature did not perform its function, that the legislature did perform, its function well, and that it intended to impart its enactment such a meaning as will render it operative and effective. This is similar to the first principle that we discussed, that a law should be construed as a whole. So a construction that would render a particular provision ineffective should be avoided. So they are quite similar. So legislative policies and presumptions, liberal and strict construction. So this is an interesting topic. For sure, your professor will ask this in your upcoming exam. So whether a statute is to be given a strict or liberal construction will depend upon the nature of the statute, the purpose to be subserved, and the mischief to be remedied, and a strict or liberal interpretation will be given a statute that will best accomplish the end desired and effectuate legislative intent. So it depends, okay? It depends upon the purpose really of the law and upon what circumstance such law applies. You do not use liberal construction or strict construction in a manner as you please, okay? So this is according to the book of Ruben Agpalo, Statutory Construction, published in 2009. So let's compare strict construction and liberal construction. So according to Agpalo, for the strict construction, the scope of a statute shall not be extended or enlarged by implication, intendment, or equitable consideration beyond the literal meaning of its terms. On the other hand, liberal construction expands the meaning of the statute to meet the cases which are clearly within the spirit or reason thereof, or within the evil which the statute was designed to remedy. However, take note of the terms themselves: strict construction and liberal construction. What does this mean? Meaning, these principles will apply when the language of the statute is unclear and ambiguous. Remember, when the language of the law is clear, there is no need for construction. That's very basic. There is no need for interpretation. That's very basic. What we do, if the law is clear, we should apply it. So you will understand these terms better when we proceed with our discussion on certain types of law. So for penal laws, so we are now in the certain types of law. For penal laws, they should be construed strictly against the state and liberally in favor of the accused. So what are penal laws? These are laws that prohibit certain acts and establishes penalties for its violations. When we say penal laws, we mean criminal laws. Okay? That's why it is penal, because it penalizes. Diba? Criminal law is that branch of law that defines crimes, treats of their nature, and provides for their punishment. Is it not? I hope you remember that, because that's in your criminal law 1. Insofar as the penal laws are concerned, what is the rule? They should be construed strictly against the state and liberally in favor of the accused. So when we say against the state, what do we mean by that? Because crimes are deemed committed against the state. That's very basic. That's why when you read a criminal case, there's people of the Philippines versus, let's say, Juan de la Cruz. People of the Philippines versus Pedro. So if you're asked during your examination, how should penal laws be construed? You do not say strictly or liberally alone. You should be complete, strictly against the state and liberally in favor of the accused. Don't forget to mention the state and the accused. Okay? So here is an interesting case. So for example, X is the common law husband of Y. They have a child named A. A has a common law spouse, B. They have a daughter named C. X committed rape against C. So are you following? In other words, C is the grandchild of X. Lolo ni C, si X. So X committed rape against his very own granddaughter. Okay? So the law in question here is Section 11 of RA 7659. It provides that death penalty for rape may be imposed if the offender is the parent, ascendant, step-parent, guardian, relative by consanguinity or affinity within the third civil degree, or the common law spouse of the parent of the victim. Take note of the bolded phrase. Take note that the imposition of penalty, however, is currently suspended. This is only for academic discussion, and this case was very old. Okay. So, question: can this provision be applied to X? Because C is the grandchild of X, correct? Lolo ni C, si X. So, according to the Supreme Court, no. Courts must not bring cases within the provision of the law which are not clearly embraced by it. So, the answer is no. Because why? It is not what the law contemplates. If X is not clearly within the terms of the statute, then he cannot be brought within them, correct? In this instance, you can see how penal laws are applied. First, there was an ambiguity. How did the SC resolve? The Supreme Court construed the statute liberally in favor of the accused and strictly against the state. But then again, you should always remember that just because we have this principle of strict construction or liberal construction, it doesn't mean that we always construe the statute strictly against the state to the extent that we defeat the spirit of the law. Let's go back to our favorite jurisprudence. Okay? I invite your attention to Caltex versus Palomar, that the purpose of statutory construction is to ascertain and give effect to the intent of the legislature. It is not to defeat the intent. So in other words, the intent of the legislature will always prevail. We can disregard the rule on liberal construction if it will defeat the intent of the legislature. So for tax laws, it is quite complicated because it will depend on what type of tax law it is. So the rules are as follows. For statutes levying taxes or duties, they are to be construed strongly against the government and in favor of the subject or citizens. This is in accordance with the principle that burdens are not to be imposed or presumed to be imposed beyond what the statute expressly and clearly declare. In other words, persons or properties subject to taxation must fall within the plain import of the tax law. Second, law granting tax deductions, refunds, exemptions are construed strictly against the taxpayers and liberally in favor of the taxing authority. There's a maxim or Latin phrase there, but I cannot read it because it's quite difficult to read Latin phrases. But tax deductions, refunds, and exemptions are looked with disfavor. Kasi nga, tax is the lifeblood of the state. That's discussed in your Constitutional Law 1. So if not expressly mentioned in the law, no deduction, refund, or exemption can be imposed because kasi nga, it's the lifeblood of the state. So third, laws granting an exemption to a national government instrumentality from local taxation, such exemption is construed liberally in favor of the national government instrumentality. Compare it with the preceding bullet. When the exemption is in favor of the taxpayer, it is strictly construed against the taxpayer. But if the exemption is in favor of the national government instrumentality, it is construed liberally in favor of the national government instrumentality. So that's a salient comparison between the two. So when we say social legislation, This pertains to laws enacted to implement the social justice and protection to labor provisions of the Constitution. This includes labor laws, tenancy laws, land reform laws, social security laws, among others. So, what is the rule? Construction in favor of labor. All doubts in the implementation and interpretation of the provisions of this code, which is the Labor Code, including its implementing rules and regulations, shall be resolved in favor of labor. So, if you read Article 4 of the Labor Code of the Philippines, that is the rule. So, it should be construed in favor of the labor. So, according to Azucena, the working man's welfare should be the primordial and paramount consideration. This kind of interpretation gives meaning and substance to the liberal and compassionate spirit of the law as provided for in Article 4 of the Labor Code. So you read Article 4 of the Labor Code. Liberal construction and interpretation does not apply where the labor and social legislation is clear and leaves no room for interpretation, in which case the law has to be applied without construction. Because again, go back to the maxim, verba legis non est residendum. From the words of the statute, there should be no departure. We discussed this already that when the statute is clear, all the courts can do is to apply it. Ambiguity is a sine qua non requirement before the court can construe the law. So let's go to the next law, rules of court. The rule is liberally construed in order to promote their objective of securing a just, speedy, and inexpensive disposition of every action and proceeding. Okay. A liberal construction of the rules of court requires the courts in the exercise of their functions to act reasonably and not capriciously, and enjoins them to apply the rules in order to promote their object and to assist the parties in obtaining just, speedy, and inexpensive determination of their cases. However, you should remember that the rules of court are not there for nothing. In fact, actions like civil actions are very technical. The liberal construction of the rules of court can be allowed in very, very exceptional cases. So, how do we balance both? You as the litigant will have to bear the burden of proof. You should convince the court why the rules of court should be relaxed in favor of you. Okay? So adoption laws, they are construed liberally in favor of the child to be adopted. The interest and welfare of the adopted child should be the primary and paramount consideration, and every reasonable intendment should be sustained to promote and fulfill the noble and compassionate objective of adoption statutes. Because adoption laws are there because of the adopted children. Ano ba ang purpose ng batas? The purpose of the law is to protect those unfortunate, needy, or orphan children protection. At the same time, it also it also allows couples or those persons who are childless for them to experience the joy of having a child. Either way, it is really for the promotion of welfare of the children. So, stated otherwise, if an adoption law can be construed in two or more ways, one in favor of the best interest of the child, while the other is not, the best interest of the child shall prevail. That's how the courts construe adoption laws. Okay, so for local autonomy, I invite your attention to Section 5 of the Local Government Code. These are the rules of construction. It was stated there. Insofar as the jurisprudence is concerned, we have very minimal at the moment. You are not expected to memorize Section 5 of the Local Government Code. However, for you not to forget, whenever you are faced with a question involving local autonomy, always keep in mind that you go back to Section 5 of the Local Government Code and always in favor of the local autonomy. Okay? So if an interpretation would be beneficial for the local autonomy, that's what we will follow. Would that mean that the local autonomy has more powers than the national government? Certainly not. Okay, certainly not. Again, go back to our discussion in chapter 1. The province of construction or interpretation is ambiguity. Okay? Ambiguity happens when the law is capable of two or more interpretations. So, naturalization laws. What is the rule? They are strictly construed against the applicant. Okay? So if you're a foreigner wanting to acquire Philippine citizenship through naturalization, the law should be strictly construed against you. I think the reason behind this is pretty obvious. Okay? Naturalization is not a matter of right. Okay? So conditions. We have two conditions. There should be substantial and formal or procedural compliance. Okay? So since it is strictly construed, it is also subject to strict conditions. But come to think of it, is naturalization a matter of natural right? Of course not. Because why did naturalization process exist? By virtue of a statute, okay? It existed because there is a statute allowing it. Therefore, kung walang statute, walang naturalization. Being a statutory right, it is strictly construed against the applicant. It would also be fitting to point out that when a statute or when a state, okay, grants Philippine citizenship through naturalization, it is also a matter of public policy because that person will be allowed to vote, okay? That person will be allowed to participate in political processes in the Philippines. So that would be a matter of public policy. So it is a vital act of the state, in other words. Okay, so for election laws, they should be liberally construed to the end that the will of the people in the choice of public officials may not be defeated by mere technical objections. Okay? Voters should not be deprived of their participation in the affairs of the government for mere irregularities on the part of the election officers for which they are in no way responsible. Technical and procedural barriers should not be allowed to stand if they constitute an obstacle in the choice of their elective officials. But you have to take note that for election laws to be construed liberally in favor of the will of the people, this concerns only technicalities. So if it is substantial, then that would be a whole different story. So let's have an interesting case. Here we have Jinete versus Arcangel. In this case, Luis de Castro filed a petition for recount of election. However, it did not include Julian Jinete and other candidates who stood to be directly affected by the recount as a party respondent. Normally, under strict procedural rules, such an omission could have been fatal to the case, leading to dismissal. So this is an election contest case. So the petitioner filed a petition for recount of election. However, the petitioner failed to implead other respondents who will be affected by the recount. So as a result, dinismiss ang petition for failure to comply with the procedural requirements. Because under the election code kasi, you should implead all other respondents. So question, is the dismissal correct? So according to the Supreme Court, no, the dismissal is not correct. Because if we will not allow the trial to proceed just because the petition failed to impede all the respondents, then we are also closing the doors for the proper determination of whether or not the true will of the electorate will be upheld. So that's how important it is. Stated otherwise, we need to let the case proceed. We will not dismiss the case by reason of failure to impede other respondents because why? We need to know ano ba talaga ang will ng botante. That's how we appreciate the case. So for prescriptive periods, what is the rule? First, you have to determine if it is a criminal or a civil case. If it is a criminal case, it should be liberally construed in favor of the defendant. If it is a civil case, then no intendment in favor of either party. So let's go to the criminal case first. Remember that penal laws, as we discussed earlier, are construed strictly against the state and liberally in favor of the accused. Insofar as the prescriptive period is concerned, it follows the same logic. Okay? That's why you will construe it in favor of the defendant. Because again, in criminal cases, the burden to prove the guilt of the accused beyond reasonable doubt rests upon the prosecution. For civil case, it does not have any specific tool of construction insofar as its laws with respect to prescriptive periods are concerned. Okay? Why? Because the principle being is that in civil suits, the statute is interposed by the legislature as an impartial arbiter between two contending parties. So impartial siya. Therefore, you should construe it impartially and not in favor of either party. So for constitutional construction, this is also discussed in your Constitutional Law 1, but we will discuss this in this subject. So framework, the Supreme Court adopted the principles of statutory construction in interpreting the Constitution. Okay, so the court actually adopted the principles that we talked about in statutory construction when they are construing the Constitution. So if you haven't watched our previous discussion yet, I highly suggest that you watch them first because they are interrelated. So what was the favorite case that we kept on emphasizing from chapter 1 to chapter 4? Caltex versus Palomar. What does this case tell us? The purpose of statutory construction is to ascertain and give effect to the intent of the legislature. Likewise, when the court construes the Constitution, they are also ascertaining and giving effect to the intent of the framers of the Constitution. So, for example, in the case of Francisco versus House of Representatives, they interpreted what does initiated mean under the Constitution. The framework for interpreting the Constitution includes, according to this case, this is actually a landmark case, verba lehis, ratio lehis est anima, and ut mahis valeat quam pariat. So in this discussion, it's no longer necessary for us to talk about the impeachment case in the case of Francisco versus House of Representatives, because this topic is better discussed in Constitutional Law 1. We will touch upon the basic constitutional construction tools as discussed by the Supreme Court in this case. So, what are they? We have first the verba lehis, or ordinary meaning. Stated otherwise, where the Constitution does not specifically define the terms used therein, they should be construed in their general and ordinary sense. So, like we said in our previous discussions, when the language of the law is clear, there's no need for construction. What the courts can only do is to apply the law as it is. So according to this case, the Constitution's language should not be understood in the sense should be understood in the sense it has in common use. Judicial power to alter is negated when the text meaning is clear because the framers and the people mean what they say. Okay? So, what is the rationale of this? Because the Constitution is not primarily a lawyer's document, but essentially that of the people, in whose consciousness it should ever be present as an important condition for the rule of law to prevail. That is already self explanatory. Of course, the courts cannot alter what is stated in the Constitution because they will be guilty of judicial legislation. Okay, ratio lehis est anima, the intent of the framers. So, when ambiguity arises, interpretation must look into the intent of the framers. Consider the reasons for adopting the provision, evils sought to be remedied, and the historical context. So here, the courts will look into the debates of the Constitutional Convention. If you read the full text of Francisco versus House of Representatives, you will see an extensive discussion therein of the debates and discussions in the Constitutional Commission. Why? Because that discussion or that debate will reveal the true intent of the framers of the Constitution. So, the primary task is to realize the purpose of the framers and the people adopting the Constitution. Like we said, its primary purpose really is to give effect to the intent of the framers. So in most cases, the Supreme Court will look into the existing realities that confronted the framers of the Constitution. This can help them determine what was really the intent of the framers when they crafted the fundamental law. So it will also reveal what were the evils they sought to remedy, what was the history. So that's how extensive the discussion when it comes to constitutional construction. So for the next principle of constitutional construction, we have ut mahis valeat quam pariat, interpretation as a whole. This is actually self-explanatory. As law students, when we study the Constitution, we do not study Article 1 alone. We do not study Section 1 of Article 2 alone. We study the Constitution as a whole. Okay? We correlate all provisions with each other. Everything is interrelated. So, what does this mean? The Constitution is interpreted as a whole, no provision stands alone. Provisions bearing on the same subject matter should be harmonized and construed to avoid rendering any word idle or nugatory. So, for example, when we are reading Article 6 of the Constitution, as much as possible, all the sections under that article, they should be harmonized, okay, as much as practicable. Why? Because they are dealing the same subject matter, the legislative power. All sections under that article should be interpreted together to effectuate the whole purpose of the Constitution. So, in other words, one section is not allowed to defeat another section if they can actually stand together. So, for administrative constructions, administrative agencies have power to interpret statutes they implement in rulemaking and quasi-judicial functions. So administrative bodies are actually accorded with quasi-legislative functions. So basically, they can make a new law with the force and effect of a valid law. So if they have quasi-legislative functions, they are also accorded with quasi-judicial functions. Because of this, they can interpret laws and rules they promulgate. So the courts give great respect to long-standing and uniform administrative interpretation unless it is contrary to law, manifestly erroneous, or abuses discretion. So that's already self-explanatory. In other words, an action of an administrative agency may be disturbed, okay, may be disturbed or set aside by the judicial department if there is an error of law or abuse of discretion or lack of jurisdiction. Okay? So that would be all. Thank you for listening. Please know that I am always thankful for your support. Maraming salamat.